I have not predetermined what will happen. It's going to be a free-flowing discourse. It is a conversation between all of us together, including yourself. All right? So we'll use 30 minutes with two rounds, and in between there'll be a question time. Of course, at the end there'll be more opportunities to ask questions or to comment. Either you're free to comment on what is being discussed here. Let's start. So the key words here is actually post-normal era and of course tropics. But let me start the story from the beginning by quoting from Thomas Kuhn's seminal work entitled The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, more than 50 years ago. What Kuhn said was that science does not progress in a simple linear fashion with cumulative knowledge over time, and to create a normal science that exists almost without change. He's talking about change and transformation. He calls it scientific revolutions, where groups of scientists begin to see anomalies in the normal science. And the anomalies build up over time to the extent that they cannot be accepted anymore. The normal science become abnormal, become out of touch, out of context, and absolute and irrelevant. And in the process, you create a new paradigm. And he actually popularized the term paradigm shift. For those who are not familiar with the book, we have a soft copy which you can have for free just out of the secretary. You don't have to buy it. So the book has written my good friend also, Professor Mahindra. I worked with him for more than 20 years. Because I was an employed person in the science. I was asking him, how do we measure the knowledge economy? He's an economist by training, econometrics in particular. He can show a relationship between causes and effects. There's a causality in economics. And he answered the question remarkably well. Now he's developed so many frameworks that I hope he will share some of them with us today. Last but not least, Dr. Akash, correct? Yes. He's from the World Bank. He's a new friend, not even 1 day old. I met him yesterday evening. We had a good engagement. He will share his experience in working with a global bank that provides finance and funding for projects across the world. And his specialty is actually service delivery, in particular health, insurance, education, etc. So the three people together, I think, can provide a fantastic foundation on what we are trying to address here, which is the post-normal era in relation to the tropics. So with that, let me welcome my good friend here to start. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, so what do we mean when we talk about post-normal times or post-normal era? The word post-normal actually emphasizes three things. Post-normal times is both a description of contemporary times as well as a theory of change. And in essence, postmodern times focuses on three types of change. One is the change that is happening at this moment in time. Second is the change that may occur sometime in the near or medium future, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, 20 years from now. And the third aspect of change is how do we adjust to change? The changes that are about to come in the future, that's also part of the three. Essentially, what post-normal times theory says is that what we took as normal, and by normal we can define it anyway, and the normal is actually dissolving, causing us more problem. There was a graffiti after COVID-19. Graffiti first appeared in Hong Kong, then it spread around the world, and it said, We cannot go back to the normal because the normal was the problem in the first place. In this sense, so the normal has become problematic, but the fact is that the normal is not actually working. I mean, the most, I think you got Marina's book here, but Piketty is the economy in the 21st century. Oh, sorry, capitalism in the 21st century. Actually points out that right throughout the 20th century, no matter what you did to the economy, inequality kept on increasing. Right? Why? Because inequality is built in the system. It's part of the system. So no matter what you do to the economic system, how you may try to improve it, inequality will continue to increase in a sense. So the system clearly is not working. So what the post-normal time theory emphasizes is that we are now moving from one given era to another era, and we are in an in-between period where the old paradigms are done, but the new ones have not emerged to take their place. So we are kind of in a position of between no longer and not yet. So it's a transitional period. The post-normal times period is not an end point, it's a transitional period where we need to think of new things. So it's also a challenging period in the sense that it's an opportunity for us to come up with a new paradigm. Interestingly, this conference is called, subtitle is Harmonizing Humanity with Nature. So here, the post-normal times analysis points to the fact that there may not be much nature left to harmonize with humanity, because there may not be much humanity left as well, unless we focus on the future, on what changes will take place in the future, and focus on what changes are taking place at this moment in time. It's interesting. So let's just have a look at very briefly this moment in time. In this moment in time, we are in a climate catastrophe. So all the point about talking about 1.5 centigrade rise and all that is now finished. In fact, the recent report, I'm not sure whether it's one of the UN agencies, climate agencies, produced a report where out of 7 principal indicators, for the survival of the planet, 5 or 6 have been exceeded. But that's just one aspect of the. We are on the verge of redefining what it means to be human in terms of bioengineering, genetic blend, that the revolution that will be happening in this moment in time. The AI revolution could bring in lots of benefit, but we know that it also has some very, very serious dangers as well. The most prominent physicist over time actually said that this may lead, AI may lead to the end of humanity itself. So there are lots of, the whole idea of truth. We have conventionally taken truth to be an absolute. Now we are in a post-truth era, where truth has become relative, in a sense, almost meaningless. Right? So there's some very profound changes that are taking place at this moment in time. And they will transform the future as we know it, or as we think we know it, in the coming decades. So that's what post-normal times actually focuses on. I mean, look, there were a couple of things there. It says think science. Well, we don't think in vacuum. We think in paradigms. Right? And clearly the science that we have been practicing for the last 30, 40 years, since the 50s, is not really benefiting all of humanity. So we need to do a different kind of science, and we need to think in different paradigms. In a sense. I think the other one was celebrate technology. Well, what kind of technology are we going to celebrate? Are we going to celebrate technology that actually is destroying the planet? Or are we going to think of a technology that actually enhances sustainability of the planet. So that's what post-normal is all about. It's about we don't consider the normal to be working anymore, and we are in between period where we need to think of new things so that whatever comes after this period is sustainable, based on care and compassion, mutual respect, trust, prosperity, and innovation. So I've just reiterated Madani, or the English version's script. And all that is based on a great deal of thought. It's a 4 to 5 years of research on which Madani and script is based. It's not something that was plucked out of the air. And it's based on post-normal analysis. The final point I want to make is there is a post-normal time Madani exhibition in Kuala Lumpur at this moment in time, in Berjaya Times Square, level 10. It's a huge mega exhibition. I invite you to those who can go, please visit it, because you will see a kind of visual expression of post-normal times.
Fantastic. Thank you. Good brother here. 2 points he mentioned. This is moment in time. No longer, but not yet. If you were to put it in different words, we are moving from what is to what will be, but not yet. In between, we may think of what ought to be. That's one. The second point is he highlighted the book I put on my desk, on my table. It's Mazzucato's book on mission economy. Also recommended, I have a free copy, you can buy one yourself. The other book that she has, which she was reading, is The Value of Everything, Mazzucato. So with that, I invite Mr. Mahendran, please proceed. The floor is yours.
Is it working? Is it working? Thank you very much. I think Prof. Zaudin gave an overview of post-normal. Being an economist, and as Tengku mentioned that I met him 20 years ago when he was working on knowledge economy. Both of us were working on knowledge economy. And he asked me this question: what's driving prosperity or economic development? Coming out of graduate school and working as an economist, clearly I think many of us were influenced by the neoclassical approach to economic development, where we know land, labor, capital is very important. But also there are anomalies where you have smaller countries like Singapore that did not have much land but were very, very competitive. So we know that for economies to grow, we had capital, we had labor, and then we had this total factor productivity, which is some kind of unknown thing, but we know it's driven by knowledge and innovation and so on. I remember Tunku asking, look, knowledge, what's knowledge? I thought about it very carefully. There is good knowledge, there is bad knowledge. But then he exposed me to an important knowledge, which is actually Maqasid al-Sharia. I don't know whether if you remember Maqasid al-Sharia. And I said, what is this? He said, this is about wisdom knowledge. I said, well, that is really fascinating. And that is the time I was supervising a PhD student on Islamic corporate environmentalism. I said, this is great, and she herself did not know. So we started reading very, very carefully. And voila, we saw so much rich knowledge that brought in not just land, labor, capital, total factor productivity, but wisdom, the human spirit. And I started reading that opened me up to all the other schools of thought, spiritual schools of thought. Something which was very fascinating in those scriptures were that nature, Mother Nature was core to human development, and human beings were custodian of nature. But somehow that shifted, People blame Adam Smith for wealth of nation, where, humanity or human beings have dominant. But that's not what Adam Smith said. If you read, there's another book, besides Wealth of Nation, most people miss this book called The Theory of Moral Sanction. It's a given. Actually, it talks about the human spirit, the divine spirit in there. And this is where we started thinking about development in a different context. That it's not about profit maximization, which is primarily the modern economic development model, but how do we bring in that values, that nature, the human spirit? Because the economic development that we have is one which is soulless. It is purely, and if you can put up the slide that I wanted to show. No, just go back. So we started thinking about this very carefully. We reviewed spiritual values and we wrote a review of 10 spiritual values. And how do we bring that back to our development agenda? Because that's what's missing. It is spoken about by Adam Smith and many other scholars, Keynes and so on. But somehow we have missed that in the context of driving economic growth in a very fast way. And this whole notion of convergence, economic convergence, everybody is going to do the same thing at the expense of the environment and Mother Nature. So we see that, and there seems to be a global single equilibrium. As what Prof mentioned, actually we don't have a single equilibrium. We have multiple equilibriums that are showing, and it's very, very chaotic and very complex, as we pointed out. And there's a lot of contradictions. We have, and we saw the last 50, 60 years. Yes, global wealth went up, but so did inequalities. The gaps started widening. That's because development was without a soul. What does that mean? We have never built the spiritual values of sustainability, the role of humanity in managing our earth in a way for everybody, not just present generation, but for the future and all the other species. The interconnectedness that the planetary health and the Anthropocene argument, we miss that, right? So how do we translate these abstract ideas of spiritual values? This is the problem. We are unable to translate that to the rakyat scene. How does it impact my day-to-day life? So we thought about it very carefully. Because of the decoupling of that, we don't see nature featuring in all our development models. Because if we have nature in there, then the premium that we have to pay for everything that we consume will be very different. But we don't have that, so nature pretty much is subsidizing everything, right? At a cost. So what we started thinking about is how do we bring that spiritual values into some common shared values that we can relate to. For me, that's what United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were. It tries to bring those spiritual values into 17 SDG goals. And how do we then translate that into not return on investment, which is very profit-centric, but it's return on values, the wisdom, knowledge that creates harmony and prosperity, the value proposition in an economic language where nature is core to it. And how do we measure that, right? If we don't take into account the environment, we're not paying the actual price of using the resources nature has given us, which is missing. We're paying fuel subsidy. Fuel subsidy is very high, but nature is paying the price, right? So how do we bring back in this new normal a different development framework, what I call development with a soul? What does that mean? Bringing back the spiritual values. In the end of the day, whatever we do, right? We spend at least half an hour to an hour with ourselves. That's reflection, that spiritual connection that we all have. How do we bring that back into everything else that we do? How do we create, through that development frame, nature will boot us out of the ecosystem. Right? Nature, nature doesn't need us, we need nature. So you better include nature in all our development agenda. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. A lot to swallow there, but let me just highlight a few things. The first thing is to recognize that it's good as well as bad knowledge. Not all knowledge is good. And then, when it comes to the economics that we practice today, Adam Smith wrote 2 books. One was The Wealth of Nations, but before that he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, before writing The Wealth of Nations. But most people, most economists even, only remember the second book. They forgot the first book. Wealth of nations only works if there is morality in the system. Lastly, I want to just highlight what Brandon is saying, dividend with soul. And he quotes from many sources, including Maqasid. Of course, Gandhi says the same thing. We can satisfy the needs of people, but not the greed of people. So with that, let's move on to Dr. Akash.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to this distinguished panel. I'll begin by I'll try to talk a little bit about human development in the tropics, and I'll begin by noting that in the last, let's say, 30 to 50 years, there has been enormous progress in human development in the tropics. Right? We've eradicated some of the non-communicable diseases, brought under control many others. We've expanded universal education. Many more kids are in school now than they were 20, 30 years ago. So that is something to be proud of, but as Professor Sardar said, the post-normal era, which is going to be characterized by complexity, chaos, and contradictions, if you read these papers, that's very true, right? And that's going to affect how we think about human capital development in this post-normal era in a major way. Related to that, the developments that we experienced in the last 20, 30 years, we did not probably think too much about how we are affecting planetary health. In the post-normal era, when we think about human capital, we have to take the planet sustainability hand in hand. So with that, let me try to talk about a couple of things that we think in the human capital space are going to be the new and complex challenges for the post-normal era. So, and because my background is in health and education, so my view is biased towards that, so I'll talk about that. So first of all, if you think about the disease burden that countries are facing, especially in the tropics. The tropics, in spite of having a young population, in spite of making strides in controlling communicable and maternal and child health diseases, continue to face a burden on that side. So, there are still pockets of populations. There are countries where maternal and child health illnesses are salient. Guatemala, Indonesia, Ecuador, they all have high rates of stunting that needs to be tackled for future human development. But now this needs to be done together with efficient programs, efficient strategies to tackle the increasing burden of non-communicable diseases that might be coming from your sedentary lifestyles, the way technology is moving forward, the way we interact or not interact with nature anymore. We don't go out for walks anymore. We sit on our computers and chug along all day. So we need to think about, so these development problems when it comes to health are becoming increasingly complex, and we need to think about how to tackle these in the post-normal era. A related one is demographic change and urbanization. Sure, the tropics have a very young population that gives us the opportunity to leverage that demographic dividend to propel growth, but there's also going to be, this is also a region that's aging very fast. So we need to think about how we are going to address that and be prepared for an aging population in the future. Similarly, urbanization. The way we've thought about addressing poverty is a combined lens of thinking of the poor as the poor without distinguishing between the rural poor and the urban poor. The challenges of the urban poor might be very different. They are very different from that of the rural poor. Providing health services or education services in urban areas is something that we don't know how to do, right? So those are issues we need to understand. The next is the climate-induced impacts on health and education. Now, new and emerging research is telling us that there are big, extreme heat events, extreme weather events, produces surge for the health sector that needs to be addressed, the lower productivity, so we need to think about that. So I completely agree with the premise of this panel, and the post-normal era are defined by things that we haven't faced before, and building human capital and using that for greater productivity. We need a radical shift in how we think about development. So I'll just say one more thing. What are the types of things we are trying to do at the World Bank to get there, right? So, and generally at the economics profession, I don't know, Professor Maynard, if you will agree with me, two economists never agree, but I think in economics we have sort of moved from this one-size-fits-all solution towards becoming more credible as a science and thinking about country-tailored solution that's grounded in research, that's grounded in evaluation, that's grounded in data. So I think we need to do more of that. Finding local solutions that are customized and fit to local needs with input from the local communities is going to be important. And at the World Bank as well, we are trying to go in that direction. The other thing that at the World Bank that we have done under the new president, Ajay Banga, who happens to be the first president in the World Bank who came from the tropics, at least, we immediately changed our mission statement for the institution, which was about poverty, ending poverty and boosting prosperity, to include a sustainable planet, a livable planet aspect. And that is key because that allows us to galvanize more support, bring in more financing for climate change action, right? So I'll probably stop there and say, just to conclude, say that the development challenges are complex. They're going to need more local solutions that are harmonized with nature, with the idea of sustainability. And places like the World Bank also need to adapt to this role, and they are adapting to this new paradigm, which is a welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Akash. I'm so glad to see that World Bank is moving.